My ex-husband kept pushing for more custody. You've taken everything from me. I've heard these words so many times over the years, they may as well have been my ex-husband's mantra, or perhaps, more accurately, his weapon. When we were married, he crafted these words in such a way that they felt like paralytic poison when they hit, forcing me to stay, even as every fiber of my being begged to leave, clawing up my throat like a building scream. He was an alchemist of words. I imagined him combining each individual word into a test tube, applying heat and stirring the concoction with gloved hands until a puff of toxic smoke released from the top, the clinical observations and notes he must have made, until he got it just right. When his words got me to do exactly what he wanted. You've taken my youth, he'd say. You've taken my money, he'd say. You've taken my happiness, he'd say. You've taken my life, he'd say. I'd taken everything from him, so in turn, I must stay. My punishment must match the crime. So I too, must live a life of misery. It took me longer than I care to admit, until I realized that these words "you've taken everything from me" were nothing more than lies. At least when they were strung together by my ex-husband. Eventually, I built up a tolerance for the poison he loaded into each of these words. They lost their paralyzing effects. I stood up. I talked back. Most importantly, I started thinking for myself again. It was then that I realized the truth behind the lie, that, in reality, I'd given him everything. I gave him my body to fuck, then to birth both of our children. I gave up my career and my independence to stay home and care for both my ex-husband and our kids. I gave up my friends, my family, and at times my own identity to please him. Even still, he was never satisfied with all of the work and effort I put into building a happy facade for our family. He was never satisfied with anything I did, or with me at all. I took a long hard look at myself, a middle-aged woman with a decade-long gap in her resume, with no money to her name, with no job prospects. A fiercely protective mother with two beautiful kids who meant the world to her, but without so many things, so many little basic needs that she desperately longed for. Without love. Without freedom. Without herself. I took a long hard look at my life and I asked myself who really lost everything here. And then, I filed for divorce. Once I took that step, it wasn't so hard. He fought me tooth and nail, tried to paint me as a gold digger greedily grabbing after the money he'd worked so hard for on his own. He completely neglected the fact that he'd only been able to make so much money off the back of my labor. I'd put my entire adult life into raising our children, into ensuring 3 home-cooked meals per day, into washing and folding and ironing his work shirts, into breathing life into a home that only suffocated me in return the second he walked in the front door. Every hour I spent in time meant that he didn't have to spend it in money. Still, I'd never been greedy, not before, during, nor after the divorce. I'd never asked for too much. I'd only asked for love, for respect, for a tiny bit of help here and there. In court, I was only asking for my fair cut of our labor. It would have been easy to fuck him over, as he said, but I didn't. I'd known for years about Jenna, the 20-something he'd been carrying on an affair with. I'd known about the matching sets of bras and panties he purchased for her, and I assumed that she wore. I knew about the jewelry. I knew about the meetings that ran late. I knew about the hotel charges on the credit cards. He made such thinly veiled attempts to hide his extramarital indiscretions that I'd assumed he wanted me to know. Like a trail of breadcrumbs that led directly to his infidelity, to champagne-soaked grunts and moans sandwiched between 1,000-count thread sheets in a high-rise Hyatt hotel room. Honestly, I was glad when she entered the picture. It meant that, at the very least, he wouldn't stumble home and try to cram his whiskey dick in me, face red as he blamed me for his failures. Not just his current state of impotence, but all of his life's failures, because I couldn't get him hard anymore. And, on top of that small victory, she actually seemed to make him happier. I was thankful for that. He was kinder to me, to the children, after a weekend away. It didn't matter to me that he spent these weekends on Jenna, not on business like he claimed, as long as he came back kinder. Knowing all of that, I cold fucked him over, but I didn't. I wanted our kids to have a happy life. I wanted them to know and love their father. I never wanted them to know there was even a shred of discontent between their parents. The settlement was incredibly fair. He'd put his girlfriend up in a prissy modern condo. He graciously chose to move in with her while I stayed in the house. From there, we had an even division of most everything, including the custody agreement. We split time with the kids 50/50. Objectively, he did well. He got to keep most everything he wanted: cars, accounts, properties, but his hatred for me was always irrational. He called me often after the divorce, late at night, after he'd found his way to the bottom of the bottle. Word slurring, he'd accuse me of raping him in the settlement, which was rich for a man who'd never quite learned to take back "no" for an answer, a complete sentence, rather than an invitation to negotiate. After the divorce, he traded in chemistry for weaponry. He weaponized his words, sharpening them into daggers to thrust them deep into my flesh with all the fury in the world behind each blow. "You've taken everything from me." So true were these words to him that he decided to return the favor. He'd take something from me, the only playing piece in his game that really meant something to me. He took me to court again. He wanted full custody of the kids. Custody battles are tough. It's difficult to maintain a sense of normalcy, to stifle your frustration for the sake of the kids, so they don't get caught in the middle. I tried my best, I really did, to keep any arguments out of sight of the children, but it became impossible. I grew anxious, paranoid, about what was going on behind closed doors at Dad's house each weekend. What was he saying? What was he doing? At first, it was more trivial annoyances. He'd load up the kids with new and expensive gifts, ones we'd agreed beforehand not to indulge our children in, back when we were as much of a team as we could've been. Indulgence was the name of the game over there. There were no rules, no consequences, no homework or chores. I was left to be the bad guy, and it drove me insane. I voiced my frustrations one-on-one with him, always wanting to leave the kids out of it, never wanting them to feel caught in the middle. After that, he started bad-mouthing me to the kids whenever they were at his place. He tried to turn them against me, filled their young minds with all kinds of myths about who I was, the horrible things I'd done to him. He told them I didn't want them to have nice presents anymore, because I was selfish, and wanted more of his fucking money. I brought these instances up in court, but the kids were uneasy about speaking against my ex-husband in court. I didn't want them involved any more than they had to be, anyway. He peddled lies about me in the courtroom in return, so that it became a battle of he said, she said, and sometimes whatever she says isn't seen as credible, especially when she's saying things emotionally, and he's saying whatever he's saying in an even tone, a nice suit, and a saccharine smile. It didn't help that he funneled his money into the sleaziest representation money can buy. My mental health was put on blast, although whatever emotional struggles I'd had were perfectly rational responses to the hell he put me through over the years. Still, my ex's legal team portrayed him as a concerned father saving his kids from an unstable and unavailable refrigerator mother. Any complaints I had never ended in anything other than vague warnings. I continued to drop the kids off at his new fuckpad, even when they came to dread spending the weekends there. They said they hated the grin always plastered on his face, and his girlfriend who was closer in age to them than she was to their father. They hated how she tried to act like their hot new mom, even slipping up one time to call herself Mama Bear. I didn't want to make them go, I really didn't, but I feared the consequences if I went against our custody agreement. As far as I could tell, he wasn't really doing anything wrong anymore. The kids had stopped coming home with stories of parental alienation. Still, I meticulously logged every indiscretion however minute and forwarded them to my attorney, even when it became clear the only repercussions would be a slap on the wrist. I started to fear what might happen to me, what he might do to me in retaliation, if I kept the kids from him. He'd managed to hold back his fist in the middle of many fights, left it hovering in the air for agonizingly long moments, until he dropped it back down to his side. But that was when we were married. There was nothing holding him back now. Tension was rising between the two of us. He started screaming matches at pickups and drop-offs. I tried my best to de-escalate the situation, seething in a sing-song voice, "Not in front of the kids please," through clenched teeth, so the kids wouldn't think anything was wrong. They, of course, knew something was horribly wrong. They told me in every way they could Dad's been acting weird since Jenna left. I don't like going there, or he keeps whispering to himself about how to get more time with us, or he didn't even go to sleep all weekend, or I feel like we're being torn in two, but I just grinned and bared through it. I logged and forwarded my concerns. That was until I arrived at the condo on a Sunday evening to pick them up. I pulled into the driveway and honked. We found this arrangement served us better. Less time interfacing meant less time for arguing. I waited a minute. No kids running out the door, eager for a hug and a kiss from mom. No red-faced husband coming to air his grievances. No twig of a girlfriend, now ex-girlfriend, I guess, teetering out on heels to ask for a few more minutes. No movement in the house at all. In fact, the lights were off. And no Escalade in the garage either. F******. I called 911 immediately. An Amber Alert was issued. I sat in questioning at the police station through the middle of the night. They wanted to know if there was any way he would go, if he had any other vehicles, if I had any information however minimal that could help them find him and bring my kids home. They wanted to know if there had been any warning signs, if my ex-husband had done anything to make me worry for the safety of my kids. They wanted to know why I hadn't done anything about it. I'd never worried for the safety of my kids, he'd only ever taken his fury out on me. I couldn't imagine a world in which he would hurt our babies. When I got home, I saw my kids' faces on the TV. Their school photos from last year. Kevin was missing one of his front teeth. Angela's hair was in braids, and she had a stain on her collar, even though I told her to be extra careful with her snack that morning. They looked like babies to me, even though it was only one short year ago. I didn't sleep that night. I remained awake, hand glued to my phone and eyes locked on the TV until 7 AM, when I would have been helping the kids get dressed and ready for school. My heart ached for Angela's hair in my hands, to part it into thirds before crossing the strands. I didn't know what to do with myself if I wasn't boiling 3 eggs for Kevin's breakfast, even if he'd only eat the whites. That's when the call came in. I froze for a moment as I checked the caller ID, my ex-husband. I answered it immediately after. There wasn't even a single moment to spare. There wasn't time for greetings either. Not that I had any interest. "John, where are you? Where are the kids?" he sputtered in return, as if my request were frivolous. As if I were just nagging him again. "John, Christ, calm down, would you? I'm bringing them now. I'm just around the corner." I was out of the house in a matter of seconds. I didn't even think to shove on my slippers or to tie on my robe. I slogged through the fresh snow on the driveway in bare feet, ice crystals crunching underfoot. When I reached the bottom, a car came into view. It wasn't a car I'd ever seen my ex-husband drive before, but there was no mistaking it was him. He was drunk, swerving down the residential street at least 15 miles over the speed limit. I didn't care, so long as he brought my children back to me. I could hear his voice as he continued rambling on the phone. "I'm done fighting. I'm done with drop-offs and pickups. I don't ever want to see you again, get it?" He pulled into the cul-de-sac, the car lurching as he abruptly shifted into park. The rear windows were heavily tinted. Hysterically, I banged on the driver's side window, shouting for him to give them back to me. Finally, he rolled down his window. I expected the smell of whiskey to come with, and it was there, but it was overpowered by a stench I can't quite describe. One you can't really know until you smell it. Oddly metallic, yet sweet. "You wanted 50/50 custody. Well, here it is." He motioned to the back seat. I leaned over to get a better look. Immediately, I stumbled backwards, then staggered forward, toppling over on 2 hands and knees. My palms plunged into powdery snow as my stomach convulsed. I hadn't eaten since before my children went missing, so nothing came up. He'd brought my babies back to me, but only half of them. Angela's top half, her braided hair matted with blood. Kevin's legs in his polar bear pajama pants. He'd sawn their little bodies in half 50/50. I looked back up at him, just as he withdrew a pistol. I wasn't scared of the gun. I wanted to die. He didn't point it at me, even as I rose back to my feet. Instead, he aimed and fired off his tried and true weapon, his words at me one last time. "You've taken everything from me, you soul-sucking bitch." He blew a hole in my gut with his words. Then he swallowed the muzzle of his gun and pulled the trigger.